What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Wait What Are We Talking About podcast, episode 186. My name is Bret, aka Enigma9011, and you can catch this podcast live over on twitch.tv/Enigma9011. You drop a follow over there, get notified when we go live, join on the chaos, join on the fun and conversation over here as we record. But if you can't catch it live, that's a-okay. Go over to YouTube and podcast services the very next week, where it's broken out topic by topic and put as one big video and MP3 for your amusement on the following Friday. Last but not least, any way you can support the show, like, subscription, follows, whatever it is, reviews. It may seem small, but it does help the channel grow, so we would love and appreciate you for that. Today, for our topics today, we're talking a lot of video games. We're going to be talking about the Borderlands series, and we're going to be talking about Mortal Kombat 1 with spoilers and stuff like that, but we'll do non-spoilers and then spoilers afterwards. We'll give you a fair warning. You can skip it, come back, all that fun stuff. But let's dive in to topic one. Let's talk about Borderlands. Bret, why the hell are you playing Borderlands right now? Well, random viewer who asked me that. Lately, I've talked on the podcast about a few games here and there. Some indies I've tried out. Cyberpunk I tried recently. And I'm in this weird mental fog or haze of like, I can't focus on games, or they don't seem super intriguing, and that's disheartening, really. So I kind of wanted something I could turn my brain off and just sit here, not have to really dissect the story, understand what's going on, and just kind of have something to do, obviously, to fill my time. And I turned to Borderlands. I'm like, you know what? I haven't played this series in a little while. I originally played it on the Xbox, now primarily playing on PlayStation. I'm like, that's be a fresh new experience. Platinum trophies, woohoo, all that fun stuff. Chase that again. So I decided, hey, let's jump into it. Let's replay these and have a fun time. So since starting that maybe a week or two ago, I've played Borderlands 1 all the way through, and I've started my journey through Borderlands 2. I think my intention right now is to play through all of them. So the four, I guess you could say, main title games. So 1, 2, pre-sequel, and then 3. And kind of just have some fun with it. Like I said, just turn off the brain, shoot some stuff, punch some stuff, laugh at some things. And just kind of fill that like game time, fun time space with something until there is that new experience that's like, oh, this is really taking my time and I'm liking it, investing in it, whatever, a la topic 2 later, Mortal Kombat, and then other stuff, Spider-Man, later in the year, until maybe there's that want and need also to play other stuff before the end of the year, for those game discussions. But oh, Tiny Tina's in there as well, my apologies. But yeah, it's been a good time to jump back into it. Surprisingly, I have a lot more fun with Borderlands 1 than I anticipated. I'm not sure if we talked about it in the past. I know I've definitely had this discussion with people when talking the series, but Borderlands 1 was very, obviously, their first touch in it, but was much more simpler in terms of comedic stuff and story in comparison to 2. I felt like they just kind of, they realized what they wanted to do, they realized the story and the characters they wanted to have, and they kind of went balls to the wall with it. And obviously the success of Borderlands 2 shows that, but in terms of presentation, it was a lot different than Borderlands 1. Not that Borderlands 1 was super serious or anything, but at times feels very dry and just kind of like you're going through the motions. And a lot of the characters, no offense, don't matter. I would say there's only one character that doesn't carry on to the rest of the series that really mattered, with TK Baha, shout out. But other than that, like, there's just jabronis that you're dealing with that don't mean anything and have no personality, anything like that. So in replaying 1, I honestly had a lot of fun playing it, and kind of remembered most of the things to do and areas to go to. When playing these games for the first time, I usually went with the turret character. So for example, for Borderlands 1, I played Roland just to have that turret support. Playing on my own, to have that extra set of hands, really, the gun, to shoot other stuff and help with enemies. That was usually the route that I kind of leaned towards. With this playthrough, I played with Mordecai for the first time, so the hunter. So primarily he uses snipers and pistols. Not that it really matters across all these games. You know, the weapons they say they're better with, you can use whatever you want. But he was fun. I thought his skill tree was a little lacking in some areas. He has his eagle or hawk bloodwing that he can use to kind of send out and attack enemies. I felt like I was barely doing that. And instead, there was another path of the tree that I really, really enjoyed, where his bullets have the opportunity to like ignore shields. So you can just blast through people. And that was definitely helpful later in the series, or rather the title, the game, as you're going through and not having to worry about this secondary health bar of depleting the shields and deplete the health. You can rinse through people that way. But he was a fun time. In terms of the platinum and stuff, obviously you need to use everybody, but you only have to do it to a certain extent. So I didn't really dive fully into Lilith or Brick. I do remember playing a little bit of Brick in a multiplayer playthrough years ago. Not that we made it through the entire game, but he was fine. Obviously, he just punches stuff for his special, but he was okay. But yeah, the game was a fun time. Like I said, a lot of it kind of rushed back to me of like, oh yeah, this area and this story and this is what we're doing. And then diving into the DLC was good because the DLCs are varied and interesting enough. It's just, there's one little bit of a game thing that they kind of lacked on. And I get what they were doing, one, but also kind of in two sucks. They don't scale the DLC to what player or what level you're at by the end of your playthrough. So obviously the DLC came out post the initial release, so maybe they were planning for like players who had already done their second playthrough by the time this had released, or whatever it was. But if you finish your first playthrough, I believe I was around upper 30s when I finished that playthrough. If you go into the first DLC, that is scaled back to like level 15 or something like that. So while you're able to get through obviously the story and the levels fast because you're just running and rinsing through these enemies that are low level, to me, there's not really a lot of joy out of that because, well, what's the point? I'm literally just running through, bing, 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 just wiping through all these enemies. There's no challenge, there's no fun to it, and it's kind of like, oh, all right, do I really even care about what's going on? And that was kind of the case for, unfortunately, most of the DLCs. The only one that I noticed was a little bit scaled up was Moxie's like Thunderdome or whatever the fuck it's called. That one scaled up a little bit, but that one doesn't have much of a story to it. It's just waves of enemies and you're kind of surviving and battling through those. But the zombie DLC, the one with Athena, oh crap, what is it called? It's the Lancers. You're dealing with those guys. General Knox, yeah. That, and then the Claptrap DLC, which honestly I didn't even finish the Claptrap DLC because, once again, it just felt like nothing was worth it because there's no challenge to it. Those kind of fell flat. I feel like I've played those DLCs in the past and I remember the generic story. I think I got right up to the end of the Claptrap one back in the day and couldn't finish the last boss because it was very difficult. But that was a little disappointing in terms of a playthrough. In order to get to the platinum, like, you got to get to level 50. So, like, not having that experience come in as well was a little frustrating. Ending up just doing half-ish, maybe a third of a second playthrough and eventually reaching that goal. But that was just a little bit of a down point, I would say, in terms of, like, a fun value, I guess you could say. So yeah, that was Borderlands 1. Borderlands 2, I've delved back into as well, not as far as completion as the first one. But I will say this one definitely has a lot of nostalgia tied into it when jumping back into it. Just like all the memories are flooding back in of that initial release, like remembering the midnight release, remembering running into these areas for the first time. We mentioned the comedy already, but those comedic elements, and forgetting about like the challenges that they had as well. Different challenges of like little Easter eggs you could find of the vault symbols, or challenge runs of defeating certain enemies or bosses before XYZ, whatever it was. Those coming into play. Handsome Jack being a fantastic villain, and his kind of shit talking throughout the entire game. Just a great game overall. I do remember always hitting this kind of lull point in terms of the story, but hopefully getting past that, get back to the good stuff. I mentioned it earlier, but usually I went the turret character. So I remember with the initial playthrough, I did go with Axton, and his turret was great. Right now, I'm playing as Salvador the Gunzerker, who I've never played as before. His tree's okay. The Gunzerking ability, like having dual wielding, essentially, is fine. I don't know if I'll stick with him the entire way, as eventually you do have to play all the characters if you want the platinum once again. But we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, Borderlands 2 is great. Eventually they would obviously add some DLC characters, so they added Gage and Krieg, which I think I have a little experience with Gage and her robot that she could summon. And then they also had DLC content for this one, which I want to say when it initially released, I played a few of them, if not all of them. But those stories I definitely feel a little bit more like distant from, that I don't remember as well. Maybe it'll be one of those things when I eventually dive into them, like, oh yeah, I remember this. I think I remember Hammerlock's the best, which is like the tree fortress that you start off in, and the kind of, not cosmic elements, but spiritual elements you deal with in the enemies. Hopefully when it comes down to that point, it is something that they scale to, once again, like learned from in the first game, and it's not just cakewalk. But yeah, definitely been enjoying diving back into that one. And like we said, they really found or hit their stride with the story in terms of the comedic elements. But then when shit really hits the fan and the build up with Sanctuary and Handsome Jack and what happens to certain characters, like that one was great. So we go from great to a kind of meh one, in my opinion. Pre-sequel for some reason felt like kind of lackluster. And I don't know why specifically. Obviously it's the origins of Handsome Jack, what turned him to kind of go evil. And you see him from his start. In terms of that, I think towards the end it got interesting with him and his story, but the rest of it kind of just, for some reason, felt flat. You're on Pandora's moon, so you have the game mechanic of the low gravity, and you can like curb stomp players by dropping down real fast with like a jetpack or something. But yeah, it includes all characters that have been part of the series before that you can play as. So you have Athena, who was part of the General Knox DLC. You end up helping her. You have Wilhelm before he's a full robot in Borderlands 2. Nisha, I believe, was probably the lowest connected character. Runs the town of Lynchwood. Yeah, I don't even remember her, but I'm guessing she's part of 2. And then Claptrap. Claptrap was just the funny one to have, with the different versions he can have himself kind of transform into for his skill tree and specials. So he's been there since the start. Character DLCs, you can play as Jack himself, and then Aurelia, Hammerlock's sister. Never delved into either of them. But yeah, that one kind of fell flat in my opinion. I wonder if in a replay it will maybe connect a little bit more. They definitely kept up their comedy that they had kind of grown from or picked up on with 2 and then gone from there. Borderlands 3. For me, Borderlands 3 started off hot, and then that was another one that kind of, not fell flat, but I don't know if just it got repetitive as it continued. So with Borderlands 3, I think the main story here is it's another weapons manufacturer that you're kind of warring against. I feel like there's a big war that's going on or something like that. It's weird that this is one of the more recent titles and I remember the least about it. I do remember being really excited for it. This was the first one I think I was going to dive into multiplayer, like have a group and a team to play with. So playing with like John, Dio, and Billy and playing a 4-player game, that was a lot of fun because there is more challenge to it. I believe they scale up the enemies for that, whether it's adding more enemies or just higher level enemies as you're going through. That was fun. But then also, I guess maybe it's a me problem, just from a flow standpoint with missions, it felt a little bit of a slower pace in terms of like checking things off or whatever it was. But the beginning of the game, I had a lot of fun. I think the only character I really actually played was Zane. So I enjoyed that he could make a duplicate of himself for his special ability, and then you could kind of go with that. Similar to the turret characters. Seems like there's a a trend here in who I pick. So yeah, it seemed like it started off hot, running back into familiar characters. You had in this one, they brought the worlds that you could travel in between, which was cool. But yeah, I don't remember much other than that in terms of the game. I don't think I finished it. I think I got towards definitely the final like section or act, and I just was burned out at that point of like, nothing's really dragging this home. That sounds bad. Bringing this home in terms of a wrap up or it's that exciting conclusion. It felt more of just like, we've hit this point, the end's right there, it's a flat line. I don't know if I want to keep going forward. So that one, unfortunately, yeah. And I think I'll say the same thing for Tiny Tina's. Maybe it was just at this point, this was not the game for me in terms of something I wanted to do, the shooter aspect, or whatever it was. But Tiny Tina's, I feel like I only scratched the surface on. Played a little bit of it. I do like that they made the twist on it. Obviously, that Borderlands 2 DLC with the Dragon Keep and the D&D aspect, I guess, was really popular, so they made a full game going off of the D&D aspects or mechanics. So it's more goofy, it's more high fantasy, you're still using the guns and everything, which is in terms of, a different story, because you're just end up doing the same thing or different gameplay. I think you could use some magical attacks here and there. But that's another one, like I said, just scratching the surface, so I don't know if I can give it a fair shake of full thoughts, review, etc. So yeah, gameplay felt fine, just more of the same. And this one I think maybe I also had a tough time connecting to because I didn't recognize any of the characters. Your character that you're playing as is like a creative character, which is cool. Obviously for D&D that's very important, but the characters that Tina had around her that she was playing the actual game with, I don't think I knew any of them. Like none of them were recognizable compared to, from what I understand, the DLC that this takes inspiration from. I believe she was playing with some of the Vault Hunters that you had played with in 1 and 2. This one seemed to be like other characters that you had met somewhere else. I just didn't recognize any of them. So like that to me was like, I have no connection to these characters. I don't understand what's going on. So that felt a little bit of a down. In terms of like fun or enjoyment, that seemed like a lower point for me as well. But yeah, overall, I'm enjoying going back through the stories of, or rather through the games. Like I said, it's just kind of filling that itch of like, I keep using the term turn your brain off of, but just something that takes low energy, low focus. You can still get enjoyment out of it, and I don't know, it's scratching that itch that's needed right now. That, like, I'm still playing games, still having fun, but it's not something that I need to invest every inch of my, or every, like, focus point in terms of, like, I need to know what's going on in the story. I need to go that, whatever it is. Jeff in chat says, it's the summer action blockbuster of game. No big thinking required. Just sit back and enjoy the ride. 100%. Exactly. Thank you. Because, yeah, just something, nothing was really clicking. Like I mentioned in the Cyberpunk podcast, like, it didn't really hit an interesting point until, I'll kind of keep this spoiler free as well, until one character made their appearance, which is funny because I haven't played since then. But after that point, I was like, oh, I see where the story's going. Oh, we have some drama here. Oh, this is intense. This is something I want to expand and learn upon. Apparently not enough. But before that, it just felt like filler, or just nothing interesting was happening. So with this, like you said, it's just the action thing, turn the brain off, go from there, and it's not that big a deal. So yeah, enjoying playing through the first one, going through the second one. We'll see if that continues through the rest of the series. I'd like to, just in terms of completing things. That's another area I feel I've kind of lacked on. But yeah, it's been a fun run through, going back through memory lane, the flooding of feelings of, like, memories of, like, playing it for the first time, and experiencing those things. But we'll have to see how it goes down the road in terms of, like, continuing. But yeah, just want to talk about that for a little bit, and that